November 1757, 12 August 1827 was an English poet, painter, printmaker, largely unrecognized during his life. Black has become a seminal figure in the history of the poetry and visual art of the Romantic Age. What he called his prophetic works were said by the 20th century critic Northrop Frye to form what is in a proportions to its merit, the least read body of a poetry in English language. While he lived in London, his entire life, except for 3 years spent of Fleming, he produced a diverse and symbolically rich collection of works which embarrassed the imagination as the body of a god, human existence itself. Although Black was considered mad by contemporaries for his idiosyncratic views, he came to be highly regarded by later critics and readers for his expressiveness and creativity, and for a philosophical, mystical undercurrents within his work. His paintings and poetry have been characterized as a part of the Romantic movement and as pre-Romantic. He was hostile to Church of England, indeed to almost all the forms of so organized religion, and was influenced by the ideals and ambitions of the French and American revolutions. Although later he rejected many of these political beliefs, he maintained an amicable relationship with the political activist Thomas Paine. He was also influenced by the thinkers such as Immanuel Swedenborg. Despite these known influence, the singularity of a Black's work make him difficult to classify. The 19th century scholar William Michael Rossetti characterized him as a glorious luminary and a man not forestalled by predecessors, nor to be classed within contemporaries, nor to be replaced by known or readily summarizable successors. Collaboration with his wife Catherine Boucher was instrumental in the creation of many of his books. Boucher worked as a printmaker and colorist for his work. For almost 45 years, she was the person who lived and worked most closely with the Black, enabling him to realize numerous projects impossible without her assistance. Catherine was an artist and printer in her own right, writes the literary scholar Angus Whitehead. I will talk about the early life. William Black was born on 28th November 1757 at the 28 Broad Street, now Broadwick Street, in Soho, London. He was the third of 7 children, two of whom died in infancy. Black's father James was a hosier who had lived in London. William attended school only long enough to learn reading and writing, living at the age of 10, and was otherwise educated at home by his mother, Catherine Black. Even though the Black were English dissenters, William was baptized on 11th December at St. James Church, Piccadilly, London. The Bible was an early profound influence on a Black and remained a source of inspirations throughout his life. Black's childhood, according to him, included the mystical religious experience such as beholding God's face impressed against his window, seeing angels among the haystacks, and being visited by Old Testament prophet Ezekiel. Black started engraving copies of drawings of Greek antiquities purchased for him by his father, and practice that was preferred to actual drawing. In these drawings, Black found his first exposures to classical form through the work of Raphael, Michelangelo, and Martin and Van Hem, Skek, Albert Dürer. The number of prints and bound book that James and Catherine were able to purchase for a young William suggests that the black enjoy at the least for a time a comfortable wealth. When William was 10 years old, his parents knew enough for his headstrong temperament that he was not assigned to school but instead enrolled in drawing classes at Henry Paris Drawing School in the Strand. He read avidly on subjects of his own choosing. During this period, Black made explorations into poetry. His early work display a knowledge of Ben Jonson, Edmund Spenser, and Parsons. On 4th August 1772, Black was apprenticed to the engraver James Bayshire of a Great Queen Street at the sum of a $52.10 for a term of 7 years. At the end of the term, age 21, he became a professional engraver. No record survives of any serious disagreement or conflict between the two during the period of Black's apprenticeship, but Peter Ackroyd's biography notes that Black later added Bysire's name to list of artistic advisories and then crossed it out. This aside with Sire's style of line engraving was of a kind held at the time to be old fashioned compared to the flashiest stipple mezzotint style. It has been speculated that Black's instructions in this outmoded form may have been detrimental to his acquiring work or recognition in later life. After 2 years, Bayesian sent his apprentice to copy images from the Gothic churches and London, perhaps to settle a quarrel between Black. James Packer, his fellow apprentice, his experience in Westminster Abbey helped form his artistic style and ideas. The abbey in his day was decorated with a suit of armor, painted funeral effigies, and varicolored waxworks. Ackroyd notes that the most immediate impressions would have been of a faded brightness and color. This close study of a Gothic, which he saw as a living form, left clear traces in his style. In the long afternoons, Black spent sketching in the abbey. He was occasionally interrupted by boys from a Westminster school who were allowed in the abbey. They teased him, and one tormented him so much that Black knocked the boy off a scourge to the ground, upon which he fell with the traffic violence. After Black complained to the dean, schoolboys' privilege was withdrawn. Black claimed that he experienced visions in the abbey. He saw Christ with his apostles in and a great procession of monks, priests, and heard their chant. Royal Academy. On 8th October 1779, Black became a student at Royal Academy in an old Somerset House near the Strand. While the terms of his study required no payment, he was expected to supply his own materials throughout the 6 years period. There, he rebelled against what he regarded as the unfinished style of a fashionable painters such as Peter Paul Rubens, championed by the school's first president, Joshua Reynolds. Over a time, Black came to detest Reynolds' attitude towards art, especially his pursuit of a general truth and general beauty. Reynolds wrote in his discourses that the disposition to abstractions, to generalizing and classification is a great glory of a human mind. Black responded in a marginalia to his personal copy that to generalize is to be an idiot, to particularize is alone distinctions of a merit. Black also disliked Reynolds' apparent humility, which he held to be a form of a hypocrisy. Against Renault's fashionable oil painting, Black preferred the classical precision of his early influence, Michael Angel and Raphael. David Bainman suggests that Black's antagonism towards Renault arose not show much from the president's opinion. Like a Black, Renault held history painting to be of a great value than landscape and portraits, but rather against his hypocrisy in not putting his ideas into practice. Certainly, Black was not averse to exhibiting at the Royal Academy, submitting work on 6 occasions between 1780 and 1808. Black became a friend of John Flaxman, Thomas Lockhart, and George Cumberland during his first year at the Royal Academy. They shared radical views with the Stothard and Cumberland joined the Society for a Constitutional Information. Gordon writes, Black's first biographer Alexander Gilchrist records that in the June 1780, Black was walking toward the Bayside shop in a Great Queen Street when he was swept upon a rampaging mob that stormed a Newgate prison. The mob attacked the prison gates with the shovels and pick-cases, set the buildings ablaze, and released the prisoners inside. Black was reportedly in the front rank of the mob during the attack. The riots, in a response to a parliamentary bill revoking sections against Roman Catholicism, became known as the God riots and provoked a flurry of legislations from the government of George III and creation of the first police force. Now I will talk about the marriage and collaboration with the Catherine Boucher. In 1781, Black met the Catherine Boucher when he was recovering from the relationship that had culminated in a refusal of his marriage proposal. He recounted the story of his heartbreak for the Catherine and her parents, after which he asked the Catherine, "Do you pity me?" When she responded affirmatively, he declared, "Then I love you." William married Catherine, who was 5 years his junior, on 18th August 1782 in a St. Mary's Church, Battersea, illiterate. Catherine signed her wedding contract with an X. The original wedding certificate may be viewed at the church, where a commemorative stained glass window was installed between 1976 and 1982. The marriage was successful and Catherine became William's partner in both life and work, undertaking an important role as an engraver and colorist. According to the Tate Gallery, Catherine mixed and applied his paint colors. One of the Catherine's Black most noted works is the coloring of a cover of a book, Europe of Prophecy. William Blake's 1863 biographer Alexander Christ wrote, "The poet and his wife did everything in the making the book, writing, designing, printing, engraving, everything except manufacturing the paper. The very ink or color rather they did make it." In 2019, Tate Britain's Black exhibitions gave particular focus to the Catherine's role in a Black's work. Now I will talk about the career. Around 1783, Black's first collection of the poems, poetical sketches, was printed. In 1784, after his father's death, Black and his former fellow apprentice James Parker opened a print shop. They began working with the radical publisher Joseph Johnson. Johnson's house was a meeting place for some leading English intellectual descendants of the time. The theologian and scientist Joseph Priestley, the philosopher Richard Price, the artist John Henry Fuseli, the earliest feminist Mary Wollstonecraft, and English American revolutionary Thomas Paine, along with the William Wordsworth and William Godwin. Black had a great hope for the French and American revolutions and wore a Pharisaian cap in solidarity with the French revolutionaries, but despaired with the rise of a Maximilien Robespierre and Reagan for terror in France. That same year, Black composed his unfinished manuscript An Island in the Moon 1784. Black illustrated original stories from real life. Second edition 1791 by Wollstonecraft, although they seem to have shared some views on sexual equality and the institutions of a marriage, no evidence is known that would prove that they had met and in vision of the daughters of Albanian 1793. Black condemned the cruel absurdity of enforced chastity and marriage without love and defended the right of women to complete self-fulfillment. From 1790 to 1800, William Black lived in North Lambeth, London at 13 Hercules Buildings, Hercules Road. The property was demolished in 1918, but the site is marked with the plaque. A series of 1700 massacres commemorates Black in a nearby railway tunnels of Waterloo Station. The mosaics largely reproduce illustrations from the Black's illuminated books, The Songs of Innocence and of Experience, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, and the prophetic books. Relief etching 1788, aged 31st, Black experimented with the relief etching, a method he used to produce most of his books, paintings, pamphlet and poems. The process is also referred to as illuminated printing, and the finished products as illuminated books are prints. Illuminated printing involved writing the text of the poems on copper plates with the pens and brushes. Using acid resistant medium, illustrations could appear alongside words in the manner of earlier illuminated manuscripts. He then etched the plates in acid to dissolve the untreated copper and leave the design standing in relief, hence the name. This is a several of a usual method of etching where the lines of the design are exposed to the acid and the plate printed by intaglio method. Relief etching, which Black referred to as a stereotype in The Ghost of Abel, was intended as a means for the producing his illuminated books more quickly than viva intaglio stereotype, a process invented in 1725, consisted of making a metal cast from wood engraving, but Black's innovation was, as described, ever very different. The pages printed from these plates were hand colored in watercolors and stitched together to form a volume. Black used illuminated printing for most of his well-known works, including Songs of Innocence, of Experience, the Book of Tell, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, and Jerusalem engravings. Although Black has become better known for his relief etching, his commercial work largely consisted of intaglio engraving. And I think you don't know what do you meaning of the intaglio. So intaglio is a group of printing and printmaking techniques in which the image is incised into the surface and the incised liner या second area hold the inks. So I hope कि it's clear. Okay, what do you meaning of the integral engraving? The standard process of engraving in the 18th century, in which the artist incised the image into a copper plate, a complex, laborious process with the plates taking a month or years to complete. But Black's contemporary John Bydel realized such an engraving offered missing link with the commerce in enabling enabling artists to connect with the mass audience and become immensely important activity by the end of the 18th century. Europe, supported by Africa and America, is engraving by Black, held in the collection of a University of Arizona Museum of Art. Engraving was for a book written by the Black's friend John Gabriel Steinman called The Narrative of a 5 years expeditions against the revolted Negroes of a Suriname, 1796. It depicts the three women embracing one another, Black Africa and white Europe, hold hands in the gesture of equality as the barren earth blooms beneath their feet. Europe wears a string of pearls while her sisters Africa and America are depicted wearing slave bracelets. Some scholars have speculated that the bracelet represent the historical fact of slavery in Africa and Americas, while the hand claps refers to Steinman's ardent wish. We only differ in a color but are certainly all created by the same hand. Others have said it expresses the climate of opinion in which the questions of a color slavery were at time being considered and which Black's writings reflect. Black employed integral engraving in his work, such as for the illustrations of a book of a job completed just before his death. Most critical work has concentrated on a Black's relief etching as a technique, because it is most innovative aspect of his art. But in 2009, a study drew attention to Black's surviving plates, including those for the book of a job. They demonstrate that he made a frequent use of a technique known as a reposes, a means of obliterating mistakes by hammering them out by hitting the back of the plate. Such a techniques is typical of engraving work for the time are very different from the much faster and fluid way of a drawing on a plate that Black employed for his relief etching, and indicates why the engravings took so long to complete. Now I will talk about the later life. Black's marriage to Catherine was a close and devoted until his death. Black taught Catherine to write, and she helped him color his printed poems. And Glenn Christ refers to the stormy times in the early years of the marriage. Some biographers have suggested that Black tried to bring a concubine, and I think you know very well about what do you mean of the concubine being beneath. So that is the meaning is the interpersonal or sexual relationship between two people, so into the marriage bed in accordance with the belief of the more radical branches of the Sweden Borgian society. But other scholars have dismissed these theories as a conjecture. In his dictionary, Samuel Foster Damon suggests that Catherine may have had a stillborn daughter for which the book of Athens is elegy. That is how he rationalizes the book's unusual ending, but note that is a speculating. Phalmon. I will talk about this Phalmon. This is a memorial plaque outside the Fox in the Phalmon describe the Black's arrest. In 1800, Black moved to a cottage at the Phalmon, Sussex, now West Sussex, to take up a job illustrate the works of William Harley, a minor poet. It was in the cottage that Black began a Milton. The title page is dated 1804, but Black continued to work on it until 1808. The preface to this work includes a poem beginning and did those feet in the ancient time, which we kept the words for the anthem Jerusalem. Over time, the Black began to resent in his new patron, believing that Hele was uninterested in true artistry and preoccupied with the mere drudgery of a business. Black's disenchantment with the Hele has been speculated to have influenced Milton, a poem in which Black wrote that corporeal friends are spiritual enemies. Black's trouble with the authority came to a head in August 1803 when he was involved in a physical altercation with the soldiers John Schofield. Black was charged not only with the assault but with the uttering seditious and treasonable expressions against the king. Schofield acclaimed that Black had exclaimed, "Damn the king, the soldiers are all slaves." Black was cleared in the Chester's Assizes of a charges according to report in a Sussex County paper. The invented character of was so obvious that acquittal resulted. Schofield was later depicted wearing mind-forced mantlets in illustrations Jerusalem, the emanations of the giant Albion. Blake returned to London in 1804 and began to write illustrate Jerusalem 1804 to 20. His most ambitious work having conceived the idea of portraying the characters in a Geoffrey Chaucer Canterbury Tales. Black approached the dealer Robert Cremick with the view to marketing and engraving, knowing Black was too eccentric to produce a popular work. Cremick promptly commissioned Black's friend Thomas Start hard to execute the concept. When Black learned he had been cheated or broke off a contact with the Stothard, he set up an independent exhibition in his brother's haberdashery shop at the 27 Broad Street in Soho. The exhibition was designed to market his own version of a Canterbury illustrations along with the other works. As a result, he wrote his descriptive catalogue 1809, which contains with what Anthony Blunt called brilliant analysis of a Chaucer and is regularly anthologized as a classic of a Chaucer criticism. It also contained detailed explanations of his other paintings. The exhibition was very poorly attended, selling none of the tempera's or watercolors. Its only review examiner was a hostile. Also, around this time, circa 1808, Black gave a vigorous expression of his views on art in an extensive series of polemical annotations to the discourses of Sir J. Reynolds, denouncing the Royal Academy as a fraud and proclaiming to generalizing is to be a idiot. In 1880, he was introduced by George Cumberland's sons to a young artist named John Linnell. A blue plague commentaries Black and Linnell at Old Wilderness or at North End Hampstead. Through Linnell, he meet Samuel Palmer, who belonged to a group of artists who called themselves the Sorham Ancient. The group shared Black's rejections of modern trends and his belief in spiritual and artistic new age. Aged 65, Black began a work on illustrations for a book of a job, later admired by John Ruskin, who compared Black favorably to Rembrandt and by Vaughan Williams, who based his ballet job a mask for dancing on a selection of illustrations. In later life, Black began to sell a great number of his works, particularly his Bible illustrations, to Thomas Burt's, a patron who saw Black more as a friend than man, whose work held artistic merit. This was typical of a opinions held of a black throughout his life. The commission for the Dante's Alighieri's Divine Comedy came to a black in 1826 through the Neeled with the aim of a producing series of a engraving. Black's death in 1827 cut short the enterprises, and only a handful of watercolors were completed, with only 7 of the engravings arriving at proof form. Even so, they have earned praise. The Dante watercolors are among Black's richest achievements, engaging fully with the problem of illustrating a poem of this complexity. The mastery of a watercolor has reached an even higher level than before, and is used to extraordinary effect in a differentiating the atmosphere of the 3 states of being in the poem. Black's illustrations of the poem are not merely accompanying works, but rather seem to critically revise a furnace commentary on a certain spiritual or more moral aspects of the text. Because the project was never completed, Black's intent may be obscured. Some indicates that bolsters the impression that Black's illustrations in their totality would take a issue with the text they accompany in the margin of a Homer bearing the sword and his companions. Black notes everything in the Dante's comedy show that for a tyrannical purposes he has made this world the foundation of all, and the goddesses nature, and not the Holy Ghost. Blake seems to descend for the Dante's admirations of the poetic works of ancient Greece, and from the apparent glee with which Dante lauds punishments in hell, as evidenced by the grim humor of the cantos. At the same time, Black shared Dante's distrust of a materialism and the corruptive nature of a power, and clearly realized the opportunities to represent the atmosphere and imagery of a Dante's work pictorially, even as thus he seemed to be a near death. Black's central preoccupation was his feverish work on the illustrations to Dante's Inferno. He is said to have spent one of the last shillings he possessed on a pencil to continue sketching. Okay, it's a very long, I know that, but what shall do? Because you know very well that this is the very important for your if you are preparing of any exam, PGT, TGT, yeah, in fact any exam. So that's a very important. So that's why I will try to tell about that everything, because I know you are sometimes you are feeling so much of the boring, so I can understand, but what shall I do that, because I know this chapter is very important. So I will try that I will tell something about whatever William Black talks about in his work. So that's why this is my aim. I will try to explain. So I have done, I think 1 minute. Final years I have done or not. Marriage and collaboration, career, I think career, early works. Okay, first career, that's completed. Gravings is completed. Okay, later life. Okay, later life is done. Now, okay, later life I think is done. No, later life is not done, I think. Where I am, I'm just forgetting. Actually, I'm forgetting. Really, I'm forgetting. Okay, Dante's Inferno is said to have spent the one of the ceiling says okay. Okay, now I will take about the final year, because that is the final, is very important. Black's last year I hope you are all of you not feeling that bored. Okay, Black's last year were spent at Fountain Court of the Strand. The property was demolished in the 1880 when the Savio Hotel was built. On the day of his death, 12 August 1827, Black worked relentlessly on his Dante's series. Eventually, it is reported he ceased working and turned to his wife, who was in the tears by his beside. Beholding her, Black is said to have cried, "Stay, cat, keep just as you are. I will draw your portrait, for you have ever been an angel to me." Having completed this portrait, now lost, Black laid down his tools and began to sing a hymns as verses. At the sixth that evening, after promising his wife that he would be with her always, Black died. Grace to report that female logger in the house present at his expiration as said, "I have been at the death not of a man but of a blessed angel." George Richmond gives the following account of a Black's death in the letter to Samuel Palmer. "He died in the most glorious manner. He said he was going that country he had all his life wished to see, expressed himself happy, hoping for salvation through the Jesus Christ. Just before he died, his countenance became fair, his eyes brightened, and he burst out singing of the things he saw in heaven." Catherine paid for Black's funeral with the money lent to her by Linen. Black's body was buried in a plot shared with the others 5 days after his death on the eve of his 45th wedding anniversary at 1 minute, where is going? Wedding anniversary at the Dissenters burial ground in Burnhill Fields in the city of London area. His parents' bodies were buried in the same graveyard. Present at the ceremonies were Catherine, Edward Calvert, George Richmond, Frederick Tatham, and John Lennon. Following Black's death, and Catherine moved into a Tatham house as a housekeeper. She believed she was regularly visited by Black's spirit. She continued selling his illuminated works and paintings, but entertained two business transactions with the first consulting Mr. Black on the day of his death in October 1831. She was in as calm and cheerful as her husband, and called out to him as if he were only in the next room to say she was coming to him and it would not be long. On her death, long-time acquaintance Frederick Tatham took possession of Black's work and continued selling them. Tatham later joined the fundamentalist in Irving Gate Church, and under that philosophy, conservative members of that church burned manuscript that he deemed heretical. The exact number of destroyed manuscript is known, but shortly before his death, Black told her friend and he had written 20 tragedies as long as Macbeth, none of which survived. Another acquaintance, William Michael Rossetti, also burned works by Black that he considered lacking in quality, and John Linus erased sexual imagery from the number of Black's drawings. At the same time, some works not intended for publication were preserved by friends, such as his notebook and Island in the Moon. Black's grave is commemorated by two stones. The first was the stone that reads, "Nearby lie the remains of the poet painter William Black, 1757-1827, and his wife Catherine Sophia, 1762 to 1831. The memorial stone is situated approximately 20 meters away from the actual grave, and which was not marked until 12th August 2018 for years. Okay, so Black Prize of a Religious Art, he has also got this. in Australia 1949. Now I will talk politics. Blake was not active in any well-established political party. The poetry consistently embodies an attitude of a rebellion against the abuse of a class power, as documented in David Erdman's Basil study, Black Prophet Against the Empire, a poet interpretation of the history of his own times, 1954, and against also blight effects of the industrial revolutions. Okay, now development of the views, because William's later poetry contains a private mythology with a complex symbolism. His late work has been less published than his early, more accessible work. The vintage anthology, Black, edited by the Patti Smith, focuses heavily on the earlier work, as do many critical studies such as William Black by Dizzy Gillingham. Okay, so now that's the finish of this work, and I will talk about the religious views regarding conventional religion. Black was a satirist, ironist in his viewpoint, which was illustrated, summarized in his poem Vala Ya for Jews, one of the uncompleted prophetic books back in 1797. The demi-mythological, demi-religious main characters of the book are four Jew. Okay, so that's not very important. What is this? Enlightenment philosophy. Black had a complex relationship with the Enlightenment philosophy. He championed of imagination as the most important element of human existence. Due to his visionary religious belief, he opposed the Newtonian view of the universe. This mindset is reflected in a excerpt from the Black Jerusalem. Okay, so I hope कि Freeler, there is since his death, Black has been claimed those of a various movement who apply is a complex and often elusive use of a symbolism, allegory to issue that concern them. In particular, Black is sometimes considered, along with the Mary Wollstonecraft and her husband William Godwin, a forerunner of the 19th century free love movement, a broad reform tradition starting in the 1820s that held that marriage is a slavery and advocated the removal of all state restrictions on sexual activity such as homosexuality, prostitution, adultery, and culminated in the birth control movement of the early 20th century. I hope that is also is clear. So I hope creativity you know very well, visions also have can we see. So most important there is cultural experience. Most important I will talk about the works because that work is very important. Song of Innocence and of Experience, Songs of Innocence, Book of the Tale, Marriage of Heaven and Hell, The Gates of Paradise, Visions of a Daughter's Albanian, Continental Prophecies. There is a includes the three: America Prophecy, Europe Prophecy, and Song of a Loss. There is no natural religion. That's also work. The first book of Origin and all religions are one. The Book of Laws, the Book of Ahania, Milton, Jerusalem, the Emissions of the Giant Albion, Non-Illuminated Poetical Sketch, An Island in the Moon, the French Revolution, Song of Liberty, Voila, I mean Bourgeois and Trial. Okay, that's it. Okay, that work is he has written. It's the most important. And what I'm saying, I hope you all of you cleared about the William Black. Please comment on my videos. This is my humble request. Don't be skip the video. Please watch complete video and also share with your friends. It's my humble request. I hope you all of you definitely will share my channel and also videos whatever videos I had uploaded on my channel. So thank you so much. I hope you are well, and thanks for the support and share. Thank you.